Picture the intense, chaotic scene inside a standard delivery room. There are bright, blinding medical lights, loud machines beeping relentlessly, nurses rushing around, and a sheer sensory overload of completely unfamiliar sounds and sudden movements. A baby is born into this massive chaos, frightened and overwhelmed, crying uncontrollably as they take their very first breath of cold air. But then, amidst all that jarring, terrifying noise, one specific person leans in close and speaks just a few quiet words, and the baby immediately miraculously stops crying. In a room bursting with 1,000 brand new stimuli, the infant's tiny brain completely zeroes in on exactly one single sound. The doctors and nurses will smile warmly and say the cliché phrase that everyone accepts as biological fact. Babies just naturally love their mother's voice. But the actual neurobiological truth of that profound moment is so much deeper and more astonishing than simple biological preference. That baby does not just like that specific voice. That newborn baby has already attended exactly 1,000 hours of absolute immersive lecture in that exact voice. They are not suddenly hearing a comforting new sound in the delivery room. They are finally meeting the professor. The grand, fascinating paradox of human pregnancy is that most adults conceive of gestation as an entirely physical, biological construction project. We assume the baby is simply growing bones, building organs, and waiting patiently in the dark until birth naturally kicks off the start of actual consciousness. We believe that birth is the beginning of experience, but the hard science of fetal neurology completely shatters that assumption. The womb is absolutely not a quiet, passive waiting room. The womb is the most brutally efficient, highly immersive, spectacularly complex sensory classroom that evolution has ever successfully designed. Long before that child takes their first breath of air, their rapidly developing neural networks are furiously running high-level sensory processing, incredibly complex pattern recognition, and sophisticated associative learning, and the curriculum they are mastering is vast. It is not just the muffled sound of maternal voices or the muffled thumping of a heartbeat. It is an all-encompassing, full-spectrum, multisensory education that systematically prepares their nervous system for the precise, specific environment they are about to be born into. Birth is not the first day of school for a human infant. Birth is simply the graduation ceremony. To truly comprehend the staggering reality of prenatal learning, you must completely merge the brilliant findings of developmental psychology with the actual structural development of fetal sensory systems. In the realm of psychology, the foundational proof begins with the legendary maternal voice preference studies conducted by Anthony DeCasper and William Pfeiffer. In their brilliantly designed experiments, newborns who were only hours old were given a specialized pacifier that controlled audio playback based on their sucking patterns. Given the choice, the newborns systematically altered their sucking rhythm explicitly to trigger a recording of their own mother's voice rather than a female stranger's voice. They were displaying clear, undeniable operant conditioning based on knowledge acquired entirely before birth. Even more astonishing is the famous Cat in the Hat study. Pregnant mothers were instructed to read Dr. Seuss's The Cat in the Hat out loud twice a day during the final trimester. After birth, those infants demonstrated a massive, measurable preference for the specific prosodic rhythm of that exact story over a completely novel story, regardless of who was reading it. They had literally memorized the cadence of the text while entirely submerged in amniotic fluid. Furthermore, all massive linguistic studies have proven that newborns preferentially attend to the specific prosodic patterns of their mother's native language within mere hours of birth, effectively crying with the melodic accent of their home country. Now, layer this undeniable behavioral psychology over the structural neuroscience of fetal development. The fetal auditory system is structurally complete and fully functional by the early third trimester. The tiny inner ear cochlea is actively translating mechanical sound waves into electrical impulses, and the desperately growing auditory cortex is actively processing patterned sound. We see the ultimate neurological proof of prenatal learning through fetal habituation. If you play a novel sound to a late-term fetus, their heart rate spikes. They orient to the new stimulus. But if you play that exact same sound repeatedly, their heart rate eventually settles. They learn the sound, they recognize it as non-threatening, and they cognitively stop caring. But the curriculum is absolutely not limited to the auditory cortex. Consider the astonishing gustatory studies conducted by Julie Minella at the Monell Chemical Senses Center. The amniotic fluid that the fetus constantly swallows is continuously flavored by the mother's daily diet. Minella proved that mothers who consumed heavy amounts of garlic, anise, or carrot juice during the final trimester miraculously produced newborns who strongly preferred those exact flavors when transitioning to solid foods months later. The infants had been meticulously studying the chemical composition of their culture's cuisine through the amniotic fluid. The baby arrives at the dinner table already knowing the menu. However, incredibly far beyond the astonishing sensory, linguistic, and gustatory curriculum, the rapidly developing fetus is also actively, continuously absorbing an entirely different, incredibly profound kind of education. The complete emotional and autonomic soundtrack of the mother's 9-month pregnancy. Every single psychologically significant emotional event the mother intensely experiences physically and fundamentally alters the specific chemical environment of the classroom. When the mother engages in a furious screaming argument, massive, undeniable spikes of cortisol and adrenaline successfully flood completely across the highly permeable placental barrier. Conversely, when she experiences deep emotional connection and profound joy, beautiful surges of oxytocin, all dopamine, and endorphins comfortably bathe the developing nervous system. Each of these dramatic hormonal events fundamentally functions as a literal neurobiological lesson about the outside world. This is not conscious cognitive learning. The tiny baby is absolutely not forming explicit narrative memories of stress or anger. This is deeply primitive, thoroughly autonomic conditioning at the cellular level. The fetus is quietly, constantly calculating the absolute emotional baseline of the exact physical world it will soon be completely forced to inhabit. A difficult pregnancy characterized by massive, chronic, unrelenting psychological stress functionally produces a newborn whose hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis is heavily, permanently calibrated for constant hypervigilance, threat detection, and survival. Conversely, a quiet pregnancy characterized by relative safety and incredibly low cortisol produces a wonderfully relaxed newborn who is biologically calibrated for calm exploration and deep connection. They are fundamentally learning exactly how dangerous the outside world is going to be long before they ever actually see the light of day. When you finally step back and fully internalize this massive neurobiological reality, it must fundamentally, permanently shift how you culturally view the entire exhausting concept of human pregnancy. You must direct the heavy lens squarely at yourself and realize with awe that absolutely everything you did, every single chaotic environment you inhabited, was actively, undeniably writing the daily curriculum. Make this incredibly personal right now. Every single loud, yet the aggressive song you played on the car stereo while driving to work during that final trimester, the baby actively heard and successfully encoded into memory. Every highly specific, heavily spiced, incredibly obscure food you obsessively craved and consumed at midnight, the baby meticulously tasted and successfully mapped onto their rapidly developing palate. Every single terrifying time your own heart rate violently spiked during a painful argument or a moment of extreme financial panic, the baby accurately logged that exact stress hormone surge directly into their beautifully developing autonomic nervous system. And crucially, every quiet, deeply peaceful evening, when you rested completely safely on the living room couch and your breathing was utterly calm, the baby gratefully encoded that exact biochemical state as their fundamental, what lifelong baseline of safety. You were absolutely not just casually gestating a physical, biological body. You were aggressively, relentlessly teaching a spectacular human mind. The massive curriculum you provided was entirely involuntary, deeply unconscious, and spectacularly relentless. And the tiny, invisible student floating in the warm dark was paying attention to your every move with an astonishing, terrifying level of intensity that absolutely no postnatal child sitting in a traditional school classroom will ever be able to possibly match. Because you also successfully lived inside that magnificent classroom decades ago, This staggering prenatal science applies perfectly, undeniably to you. There is absolutely a specific song, a particular deeply spiced cultural food, a certain rhythmic voice, or a highly specific rocking motion that instantly miraculously calms your adult nervous system today in a profound way you have never been able to logically explain to your therapist. It calms you so deeply because you vividly heard it, perfectly tasted it, and completely felt it before you were even officially born into the light. It was a foundational part of your mother's brilliant involuntary curriculum. Your physical body clearly remembers the safety of that ancient classroom, even if your conscious mind possesses absolutely zero declarative memory of it. I desperately want you to think deeply about your own unexplainable biological comforts right now. What exact, highly specific sound, what specific flavor, what particular motion instantly calms your nervous system for reasons you simply cannot rationally explain using adult logic. Go directly to the comments below and excitedly tell me exactly what it is. The answer is incredibly revealing. The massive practical and deeply philosophical implications of this astonishing prenatal learning data should completely, radically revolutionize how our modern, fast-paced culture thinks about the entire exhausting 9-month span of pregnancy. If the fetus is actively, continuously learning from the mother's daily reality, then the prenatal environment is absolutely not just a dark biological incubator. It is a critical, highly sensitive, incredibly vulnerable educational environment. This dramatic, necessary reframing absolutely does not mean that expectant mothers should suddenly engage in frantic, all highly anxious surveillance of absolutely every single tiny bite of food they eat, every single loud, sudden sound they encounter on the street, or every normal emotional fluctuation they naturally experience. That crushing anxiety itself would be massively counterproductive to the curriculum they are attempting to teach. What it actually practically means is radically understanding that a truly healthy pregnancy requires society fundamentally prioritizing the mother's deep, sustained peace, because her peace is the baby's absolute baseline for baseline reality. It means aggressively recognizing that the literal things you choose to surround yourself with during those profound, heavy 9 months, the people you talk to every day, the specific music you choose to intensely listen to, the physical environments you rest comfortably in, the cultures you actively engage with are absolutely not just for your own temporary, fleeting adult comfort. They are the actual living curriculum being flawlessly downloaded straight into a spectacular, entirely new human brain. The sounds, the brilliant tastes, and the deep emotional currents you generate are successfully building the child's very first deeply held neurobiological assumptions about whether the universe is a safe, welcoming, warm place to exist, or a difficult, terrifying gauntlet. You have to actively build the exact beautiful syllabus you truly want them to study. Send this exact video immediately to absolutely anyone you know who is beautifully pregnant right now. They profoundly need to know that they are already aggressively teaching every single day, and their tiny, then magnificent student is already meticulously taking permanent, lifelong notes. Return one last profound, unforgettable time to the chaotic, blinding light of that busy delivery room. The nurses are frantically rushing. The medical machines are loudly beeping. The brand new baby has just delivered their very first terrifying, oxygen-hungry cry into the harsh air. Absolutely everyone excitedly standing in the room looks warmly at the child and happily says the exact same beautiful, profoundly inaccurate thing. "Welcome to the world, little one." But that baby has actively been thoroughly immersed in the incredibly rich world, an incredibly filtered, beautifully muted, densely liquid, profoundly complex version of it, for many long, eventful months before this singular moment. They absolutely already intimately know the precise melodic cadence of your specific voice, the intricate rhythmic rise and fall of your native language, the exact chemical profile of your absolute favorite foods, the dependable daily circadian rhythms of your waking life, and the deeply ingrained, completely familiar stress patterns of your autonomic nervous system. The violent, physically exhausting shock of physical birth is absolutely not the fundamental beginning of their conscious cognitive experience. Birth is simply the incredibly dramatic, sometimes painful transition from one entirely familiar classroom into an entirely new, significantly brighter one. And when that terrified, crying baby is finally placed heavily onto your chest and miraculously, instantly, becomes perfectly calm in your completely exhausted arms. They are absolutely not magically calming down because they are successfully adjusting to something beautifully new. They are suddenly calming down entirely because they are desperately returning to the absolute most incredibly familiar, deeply studied, heavily researched thing in their entire brief experiential history: you. Your brilliant, constantly processing, perfectly capable newborn baby absolutely did not start learning about the infinite complexities of this terrifying universe the day they were physically born into it. Their rigorous, magnificent education officially started the very first day their tiny neurological brain structures allowed them to finally hear the muffled sound of a steadily beating heart in the warm dark. And the absolute very first vital, all-overwhelmingly beautiful thing they ever learned to successfully recognize and passionately love in the darkness was exactly you.